You've both highlighted the potential for gridlock. And as we move through the discussion, I'm going to ask you to comment on what it looks like with a Trump majority or a Biden majority, because the margins are so narrow now. But although all signs are pointing to a Biden, so if you'd like to air a bit more on the implications of a Biden presidency, feel free to do so. There was a lot there, and we're going to hit on a few of those points, but I'd like to now turn our attention to what this might mean for Canada, and specifically as it relates to trade. So we all know Canada's economy is extraordinarily tied to the United States, purchasing 75% of our exports. Trump very much has pursued a protectionist trade agenda, imposed tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. US trade policy really impacts the Canadian economy. And then looking to Joe Biden, he has vowed to restore global trade harmony. He's also campaigned on protectionist policies, like creating a $400 billion Buy American procurement plan. That means buy from American companies. Jonathan, you're uniquely positioned to tell us what you think the impact of a second Trump term could be on Canada, and then what a Biden presidency might look like with respect to trade. Jonathan, I'm just going to ask you to take your mute button off.
I was instructed to stay on mute unless speaking. Sorry. I'm not uniquely positioned. Guy has served in senior positions in Washington as well. I think it's fair to say, before turning to Trump versus Biden, we have hardy perennials, if I can put it that way, in our trade relationship. There will be sectors that will continue to be competitive, industries at each other's throats. The history of softwood lumber between Canada and the United States goes back over 100 years, for example. So regardless of the outcome, regardless of the administration, in certain sectors, it will be business as usual, and there will be some contentious issues as usual. On the other hand, regardless of the outcome, we have the insurance of the CUSMA, the NAFTA 2, the free trade arrangement that does discipline and does control a good number of what might otherwise be excesses by one side or another, not to mention with Mexico as well. And even under the first Trump administration, we've seen, while certain steps were taken using extraordinary presidential powers on steel and aluminum, for example, having the CUSMA, having a relationship where we are intertwined well, led to our ability to get the United States to back down. And then finally, as you yourself have suggested, Georgina, there may not be that much difference in overall approach in terms of an American tendency to reinvest in America. Joe Biden would say he's not protectionist. He simply wants to, rather than beat up the rest of the world, make sure America becomes more competitive. That's a slightly different choice of means than the Trump administration has adopted, but it's to the same result. That's an environment that I think we're going to be in more globally, coming out of COVID, as we all seek to build back better, as we seek to diversify our sources of supply and build up our ability domestically to have stockpiles or have productive capacity. We're going to be in an era where there will be a need to reconcile the benefits of open supply chains on the one hand with the security of supply on the other. But you might have seen a column, was it yesterday in the Toronto Star by Heather Schofield, pointing out that in the last month we had 120,000 trucks crossing the bridge between Windsor and Detroit. Our intertwined economies will continue to benefit each other overall, will remain our largest trading partners for each other. And in a world of uncertainty and with tensions elsewhere in the world, which we'll turn to, I think overall, the Canada-US trading relationship will, on balance, be fairly healthy, regardless of the presidential result.
Speaking of building back better, Guy, what are some of the strategies Canada should consider to counter perhaps some of the negative consequences of protectionist policies by either administration?
Well, I think that first I would like to say if Trump is reelected, in fact, we know that we will be faced with an unpredictable environment that, in fact, we could be subject at any time to retaliatory measures or tough measures that would come out of nowhere. And maybe we would have to pay special attention to global supply chains because, in fact, there are measures that have been taken by Trump that could harm operations of Canadian company in the U.S. To give you an example, until recently, the Bombardier, after they had decided to assemble the C-Series jet in Alabama, once Trump started to impose tariffs on Chinese goods, well, guess what? The cockpit and part of the fuselage of that plane is made in China. So it was subject to a 20% tariff, and that changed, of course, the economics. I would say that in either case, we know that America will remain protectionist. In fact, the Democrats are more protectionist by nature than the Republicans. So if it's a Biden administration, we'll have to take note of that. In fact, this may also mean that some Canadian companies will have to think about maybe relocating part of their operations to the U.S. if they want to qualify for procurement plans. And we will be discussing this. There could be some major infrastructure program. But also, and it's something that Jonathan and others have tried to work out when we were in Washington, to try to carve out a special place for Canada to be included in some fashion, be covered by Buy America. We have always failed. And I think it's worth to make maybe a last-ditch effort. I'm not sure that we will be successful. But then maybe in turn, this may call for a revision in the position of the federal government when it comes to our own procurement activities. And maybe it would be time to look ourselves at Buy Canada clauses, especially if this could have an impact on U.S. suppliers, because when they taste their own medicine, maybe we could come to some solution. But we really have our work cut out for us because it's important to try to harmonize our approaches as much as possible. One big issue also, of course, will be related to taxation rates for companies because, as you know, Trump had lowered the taxation rate to 21%. Biden had said that he would raise it to 28%, which is where it is in Canada. Otherwise, it could create some problems for Canada. In terms of trade also, I would hope that with the Biden administration, we would be able to make progress to have hydropower recognized as a source of green energy. And so that could facilitate our trade with the U.S. But and finally, in terms of trade, of course, I would not bet much money on the Keystone pipeline if Biden is confirmed. As you know, I think last year Alberta exported something like $93 billion worth of energy to the U.S., and so this could have obviously a big impact on Alberta.
If I can just add, the Canada-US trading relationship is not just CUSMA-based, it's also premised on the multilateral framework. Trump has made life difficult for the World Trade Organization and its dispute settlement regime. Biden, one would expect, would seek to re-engage, but the grievances that the United States has with certain goings-on at the WTO, I think would carry forward in a Biden administration as well. I think Guy's underlying point is valid, namely, there is a very strong and continuing case to be made that Canada is part of the solution, not part of the problem. If you take steel, for example, we're fairly priced and fairly traded. Our problem is shared with the United States, and that is heavy subsidization of competing steel from China, from Turkey, from Korea, and elsewhere. And thus, proactively, it makes perfect sense, regardless, again, of the outcome, to work with the United States and to say we have common cause. And candidate Biden is committed to rebuilding some of those alliances. So one way of smoothing the way with the United States is not only to be within the North American tent, but to make common cause vis-a-vis the rest of the world. Our leadership in the so-called Ottawa Group, our proactive stance at the WTO and the G7 and the G20 provides a basis for doing that. One final point to note, and that is the United States authority to negotiate trade agreements under the so-called Trade Promotion Authority actually expires this coming year. And it will be very interesting to see whether this closely divided Congress is in the mood for renewing that authority to give the president the authority to negotiate, and if so, under what conditions.
Lots of considerations for Canada, and as you've seen, it's very hard to have a discussion about trade without talking about China. So Trump pursued an aggressive trade war with China, which has had very negative impacts on Canada. We're all aware that when Canada complied with the U.S. extradition request to extradite a high-level Huawei official, Meng Wanzhou, to the U.S., China retaliated by placing harmful tariffs on Canadian pork, beef, and canola. China also arbitrarily and illegally detained two Canadians, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, who have been imprisoned in China since December 2018. Guy, Trump will likely continue to pursue this trade war with China if he wins. How do you think this will continue to impact Canada? And Biden has said he would adopt a more collaborative, multilateral approach to confronting China. What do you think this means for Canada?
Well, we have a lot at stake, as you pointed out, despite the fact that if you look at the most recent data, our exports this year to China have increased compared to last year. And that's because there were serious floods in China. They still are faced with the African swine flu problem. So they need our products. And as part of the infrastructure program, they needed our iron ore. So some provinces like Quebec have done very well. But this being said, it's the lowest point in our relationship with China. And I think that if Biden is confirmed as president, we will see a different approach. He will be tough on China because now there is a consensus in Washington among Republicans and Democrats that China has abused the relationship, that they have stolen technology, they have not implemented all the promises they made when they joined the WTO in 2001 and so on. But the difference with Trump, I think that he would want to relaunch all the official dialogues that exist, and because those can be used to solve what can and should be solved. And so there are a number of geopolitical issues where the two countries need to work together. I would mention, of course, climate change, and there President Xi Jinping has put some pressure on the next U.S. administration by announcing that China will be carbon-free by 2060. There's the obvious example of pandemics where we need to hope that we will see more transparency on the part of China, because I think they badly managed the pandemic at the outset. Also, I expect that Biden will want to work a lot more closely with allies, because we all share the same problems when it comes to China. China has been opening its market slowly, but I think it could do a lot more. And Canada by itself, we don't have the gravitas to force China to respect international rules and stop its bullying tactics. In the case of Huawei, regardless of who is president, I think that I don't expect to see Huawei participate in 5G development in Canada, because this raises too many security questions, and we have too much at stake with the U.S. To take a different approach. And also knowing what has taken place, what has been announced recently in China with more control applied on private companies, I think we have to keep that in mind. My hope also is that Biden may take a different approach to the case of Mrs. Meng Wanzhou. So instead of going after her, maybe he could drop the charges against her and go after Huawei itself, because it's the first time that they went after an individual rather than a company, and then maybe they could come to a solution similar to the one they had with another Chinese company, ZTE, which was faced with a $1 billion sanction. But if Trump is reelected, I think then our misery will go on for years.